Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As vice chair, and not seeing the chair walking in any second soon, being 6:38, I thought we better get started. So thank you all for coming. This is an exciting meeting, both the planning committee and the board. And so we'll first start with roll call.
Mr. Abramson.
Here.
Mr. Baskin.
Present.
Mr. Benich.
Here.
Dr. Daniels.
Yes.
Supervisor Friend. Mr. Kennedy.
Here.
Mr. Kerr.
Here.
Dr. Levine.
Here?
Supervisor Leopold.
Cindy, do you want me to wait as the alternate? Or you guys can have it?
That's great. Thank you. So,
You can down to Zach or John.
okay, great. Loaded. Ms. Violente is serving as the alternate. Mr. Morani.
Marco Romanini is alternate.
Great, thank you. Ms. Matthews.
Here.
Sure, I said here.
Great, okay, thank you. Okay.
All right, that takes care of roll call. Next item is oral communication. So this is the time for any community member that wants to address us on a matter that's not on tonight's agenda and within the purview of this agency. This would be the time. Is there a microphone for those speaking?
There is a microphone. John Richter.
We'll note that the chair has arrived, and I'll let him take over from here.
Thank you. I'm going to speak up.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Bruce Tanner. I'm just a member of the community, and I'm filming for the public record. I would just like to ask you all to speak up clearly and distinctly, particularly with the ambient noise. I'd like to be able to get everybody's conversation on the tape accurately. Thank you.
I have a question. Good evening. I noticed on the agenda there's a couple of letters from Becky Steinberger. Is there any way to get a copy of those letters?
They're not part of the agenda packet already?
They're part of the packet.
Yes.
They are.
Oh, they are?
Yes, they're in the
They're at the very end of the packet.
Okay, thank you. This is good.
John, could you repeat that for folks who didn't hear? Because there's two copies of the binders, or two binders that are available in the package.
Yeah, there's copies of the binder available with the full packet that are on the table outside, right outside the door. Oh no, they're in Darcy's hand.
Any other oral communication? Okay. Hearing none, we're going to go back to item 3 on the agenda, elections. And this is the time at the beginning of the fiscal year when the MGA board elections a chairman, a vice chairman, and a secretary. We're going to open it up for nominations for the position of chair. Yes.
I'd like to nominate Tom Hughes.
Okay.
Does this require a second?
Nomination shouldn't.
That's what I'm asking.
David?
Does a nomination require a second?
It does not. Any other nominations for chair? Okay. Hearing none, it's a settled issue.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Well, we're going to hand off the church back to you.
Go ahead and finish.
Go ahead. Yeah, Ralph.
Are you going to do the vice chair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, so if you would like me to take over from here, that's fine. So any nominations for vice chair?
I'm nominating. Thank you.
Okay. Any other nominations? All right, well, I suppose we don't need to vote on that either then, if we are good with that, okay? And secretary, any nominations for secretary?
I cannot hear that at all.
Yes, sir.
Jim Kerr.
Okay. Jim? Did you hear that? Mr. Kerr was
I
nominated?
did, but it was very quiet.
Hoping you didn't hear.
Any other nominations for secretary? Well, I thank you, Mr. Kerr, for serving you. Ms. Matthews.
Rely on you for advice.
All right. Thank you. The next item is the consent agenda. Is there anyone that wishes to have anything pulled off of consent? Yes, sir.
5.3?
Okay. 5.3 will be pulled off consent.
5.1.
And 5.1. Any others? Any motions for the remaining consent agenda items?
I'll move approval of the consent agenda items except for 1 and 3. And I'd also like to say, as one of the participants in the communications and engagement plan, that was a real pleasure to work on with this committee. So we're pleased to hold it.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded for the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. We'll go back to item 5.1.
On page 16, it's the agenda that's being approved on 6.5 there. There's a bunch of bullet items. The first one says Dr. Daniels attended, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next one says DWR provided. And it sounds almost like DWR was here at the meeting. Instead, all those additional bullet items there are actually things that I said, even though they're with the same level as Daniels attended, et cetera. I think they need to be indented, because I see the same thing as happening in 6.4, is that there's some things at primary level and some things that should be at secondary levels, and it's confusing.
You just said including the following.
Yes, and then these things need to be indented, if not, yes. And 6.4 is the same way. So I think going forward, we can change this one, so I think certainly going forward, we should make it clear that the indentation, these things are part of something higher level, versus primary level.
Right, so clarifying, who's making the comments
Exactly.
on those.
What is a comment and what is included in that comment?
Okay. Any other changes to the minutes?
I move approval.
Approval? Seconded by Kennedy. Okay. It is on. It's pretty lovely, but I guess not lovely enough. So it's been moved and seconded with those corrections. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That carries.
I would abstain.
Okay, so Violante will abstain as to not part of that meeting. All right, so next item that was, okay, we have item 5.3. Mr. Baskin.
Yeah, so on this item, I'm comfortable with the policy as far as it goes, but there's a provision I would like to add, which is that for members of the board or the advisory committee who don't have an institutional email, who use like a Gmail account or whatever, that they have the option, but not the requirement, that they get an institutional account. That they have the option to have mail that might be directed to them by the public or whoever, sent to staff and forwarded to them rather than sent to them directly.
That changed that. Any discussion? Any members of the public wish to address us on that item? Okay, seeing none, we'll make a motion to...
Yeah, I'll move that we make the change as I stated.
Second.
Shoot, let's give that second to Mr. Marani. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, that carries. Thank you.
So I moved the change. Now we need to move the policy into effect as changed.
Well, that wasn't including that, eh?
Didn't you move the policy with that change?
I just moved to change the policy, the proposed policy.
Oh, well, that makes it complicated. All right, well, make the second movement then.
So I'll move the policy as amended.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that motion carries as well. All right. So next on the agenda are updates, staff reports.
Right, so this item was on here because we have, oh, sure. The staff update item is on here because the joint meeting is listed as a 7 p.m. start time. And so we wanted to make sure that any of the advisory committee members, that they were all here before those presentations started at 7 p.m. So we're going to take this opportunity to provide some staff updates, and we can also perhaps take by show of hands, we're checking our list to see if the advisory committee members are all present, in which case perhaps we can start earlier.
One is missing here.
One is missing here, okay.
Missing two.
Two, okay. So I can start with the staff updates. I can give an update on the status of the Department of Water Resources Groundwater Sustainability Plan grant. As I think all of you are aware, the MGA was awarded a grant a couple of months ago. It's a $1.5 million grant with an additional $1.5 million in local matching funds from the member agencies that's going to support tasks to develop the groundwater sustainability plan. And so staff have been negotiating with DWR staff to finalize the scope of work and budget and to make any essentially minor updates to the proposal that was previously submitted and approved. So that's still in the process of getting done, and I would expect by hopefully by the next time the board convenes in a couple of months, we will have a draft agreement, if not potentially an executed agreement. In the meantime, work can still progress, and so it's not having any effect in terms of the staff and the consultants' work on the plan. It's just a matter of the formal grant reporting and the invoicing for the match funds and the reimbursement can't proceed until we have a formal executed agreement. Any questions on that before we potentially look at other staff for updates? Okay. Are there staff who want to give updates now, or would you prefer that we take a attendance on the advisory committee members, and if everybody's here, perhaps we can get started with the project presentations. Seeing none.
No staff updates.
Okay.
We probably shouldn't start until 7 if that's
Right.
set time we have.
There's another item at the end of the meeting for future agenda items, so that's something else we could potentially address right now. If anybody has thought, we'll come to it again, but we could also ask for future agenda items.
Yeah, so in terms of a future agenda item, I think that would probably be useful both for the board and for the advisory committee is to have a relatively brief presentation on how to keep your personal records related to the business of the MGA, so that in the event there's a public records request or a subpoena, that it's easy for you to comply and you know how to organize your records to do that. And what kind of burden it could be on us to get public records requests and how that works.
So a little update at one of the meetings coming up for all of us.
For all of us, I mean, there are plenty of people involved between the board and the advisory committee who don't have experience on public bodies, and a little bit of information about how those things work and what you might be expected to respond with, and how you deal with personal records retention would probably be helpful for people.
Great idea. Others? And so, if there's no other staff updates...
Tom, there's a hand up here.
Oh, wait, there you are. Sorry.
It's something I've mentioned before, but I'll repeat again. I would like to have a discussion about policy of projects. So, for example, does the agency want to have one project to solve our problem, or do we want to have 2 or 3, or do we want to have none? In North Sacramento County, there was a replenishment district that basically divvied out responsibility for the savings projects essentially to individual agencies. And so this agency would reduce by 300 acre feet, this one would reduce by 200 and so forth. Or one of them could say, well, I'm not going to do it, but I'll pay one of my neighbor agencies and they will do theirs and mine. So what do we want to do with that, basically?
Any other thoughts on that? Any other ideas for future agenda items?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of that? I missed it, Bruce.
It's a policy discussion about, does this agency want to try and have one project to solve our sustainability problem? Or would we be comfortable having 2 or 3 or more? Or do we want to have no projects that the agency owns and operates? Instead, individual agencies would do their own savings or, or share savings or whatever. So that's the way the North Sacramento one did it, is that they don't do any savings, the agency doesn't do any savings itself. Instead, it divvies out responsibility for savings to the individual agencies. So they will do projects or whatever to save.
So what I'm curious about is that part of the plan development that we're in the process of and going through with the advisory committee is the consideration of projects and what the overall plan will be. And how is what you're talking about different than doing that as part of development of the plan itself?
We might rule out certain possibilities. If the agency doesn't want to have multiple projects or wants to have no projects, that would narrow the field down for the advisory committee.
It's my understanding that we've sort of farmed that out to the advisory committee to come back and make a proposal to the board along with staff to work on drafting the plan, and the advisory committee to give its advice to the board on whether they think that's a good idea. And periodically we have reports come back to the board when the board can give guidance. So you would like to have that be one of the guidance items at some point?
Yes.
Other thoughts on that item? Yes.
Not on this item, different item.
Okay, yes.
So the staff has been doing some sort of forecasting planning in terms of the advisory committee's work, and one of the items that we've been talking about is some work that we've got underway with a consultant, Brechtel's consultant, to look at possible fee structures. And so we think that roughly around November would be a good time to come back with another joint meeting like this that would talk at least about the various concepts that are out there about how fees, if they were going to be levied, might be levied, and what would be the various approaches. So I think that would be a future agenda item.
Any others?
Well, I've asked before, and I'm sure this will come up in the discussion of the groundwater model on the advisory committee, but I'd like to see us have a presentation at some point, sooner than later, that has everybody seen how much water we've used in the basins from 85 to now, and a projection of what that water use looks like moving forward over the next 15 or 30 years. And putting that in context of the rainfall that goes with it. And I want to see such a graph or a spreadsheet, or what point that is. And I know there are some initial work being done on that already by staff. But that's something I would like to see the board get to see, as well as the advisory committee. And I'd like to see it as something for context for whatever we're discussing or going forward.
Can I just clarify? So each individual agency probably has some projections or an idea about water use during that previous time and projections to the future. You want to see one that maybe includes the unincorporated areas and that are not part of the district, and also put it all together.
Put it all together and show it on the same scale with the amount of rainfall taking place, and potentially with population and temperature as well, since those things are going to affect that going forward. But at least 85 to now, and now to whatever that is going forward, another 30 years, right? So to 45, and looking at that in a way that we can compare. But not that that means everybody's held to that, but I know, as you said, each agency has some projections for their own assumed demand going forward, but putting that all together along with the private pumping and the agricultural and taking a look at that, where we see it all in one place.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, John, that will show up in the context of discussion of the model, because the model really does put all that together and it does project it out into the future. So as we look at the assumptions that the model is using, particularly with the projections in the future, it is going to do that for each year.
Right.
So we will be able to see that.
I'm just asking that I'd like to see it as something that the board as a whole can see as a piece of context.
Right.
And that we can, obviously it may change and it may go through some iterations, but it'd just be nice to have that be something that's a publicly available document.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Well, I was going to say some of the similar things, that even though each of the little agencies have their own projections perhaps, there's one thing that our entire MGA is going to be using, which is the model. So that's the thing we should concentrate on.
Any others?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted to have a little further discussion with Dr. Daniels about his proposal. I think we should be very careful about not setting the boundaries too firmly for what the advisory committee is charged with and letting them do their work. So
I think it'd be perfect to do this in this September joint one again.
well, perhaps. I mean, the concern I have is that the decision whether to do a project, no project, or multiple projects, and how they might be allocated out through the different agencies who are participating here, that's the guts of the plan. So I think it's fair game to talk about it, but I also don't want to usurp the job of the advisory committee and staff in doing their more in-depth examination of that issue and bringing it back to us.
Tom, I think what we've heard is individual interests of individual people, but we haven't actually voted to give direction on those. And so I think our staff has heard that these are areas of interest, and they can go discuss them and think when would be the best time to incorporate those in the work program, fold them in. Some of them will be automatically folded in. So I don't think we should create the expectation for staff that these suggestions now are added to their work list. They're areas of interest.
Right. I guess I was under the impression that these are suggestions that staff would then work into future agendas at the appropriate time.
Well, but there's two levels of the agenda. One is to put it on the agenda for discussion of what projects might occur. Another is to decide when we want to have that discussion.
I mean,
Or even if we want to have that discussion before we get a report from the advisory committee.
Seems to me like the discussion is starting tonight with the invitation of the advisory committee to be here while we're discussing water supply options. So I think I agree with you that we preliminarily should leave it up to the advisory committee to look at this. They're looking at it with fresh eyes and fresh perspectives, and let them do their work.
Okay, well, it's perfect timing for everything. Thank you. It is now 7:01, and so I'm hoping that all of the advisory committee members at least had a chance to get here by the 7 o'clock hour. And so now we're going to turn it over to, it's a welcome and roll call again for the Groundwater Sustainability Plan Advisory Committee, and then we will get into our presentation.
Okay, I'm going to announce the members of the advisory committee, so just let me know if you're here. Ms. Anderton.
Here.
Mr. Bargetto. Present. Mr. Baskin is already here and recognized. Mr. Cassell. Here. Mr. Gudger. Okay. Dr. Jaffe. Present. John Kennedy is already here, recognized. Mr. Lear. Present. Mr. Lake. Okay. Ms. McCarthy?
Here.
Mr. Romanini is already here. Mr. Root?
Here.
Ms. Violante is already here. Mr. Weiner? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, and as I understand, the informational presentations are going to start with Mr. Ricker.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. Can everybody hear me okay? I just should not use the mic. Oh, do I have to use the microphone?
Talk to the audience.
Can you guys hear me okay?
I hear
Okay.
you okay.
Okay.
Okay, well,
I'm not going to use it because what happens with this microphone, you go in and out sort of if you don't keep it right up there. Are you bringing up the presentation?
I am. I'm going to bring it up. In the meantime, could you introduce RTC?
Yes, I will do that. Do I need a button? Anyway, along with our advisory committee, we are being assisted in our efforts at our advisory committee meetings by Kearns and West. And Kearns and West are here tonight, or representatives of Kearns and West, Eric Poncelet and Cece Vu, who have really been helping us run the advisory committee meetings, get organized 3 or 4 months in advance, and really help us work through the whole process. I guess I can stay over here. So tonight, the idea is that we're going to talk about projects, what's been going on. There's been a lot going on. We haven't just been sitting around waiting to have a groundwater sustainability agency. We've been working on water supply projects for years, either as a region or as individual agencies. So we wanted to give the board and also the advisory committee at the same time a sense of what's going on, sort of in parallel, actually preceding this effort and now in parallel with these efforts that we will be working on with our groundwater sustainability plan, and that there's going to be some convergence as we identify projects and as we develop the implementation plan. So I'm going to give a brief review of the prior efforts, and then Rosemary and Ron are going to go into more details in terms of what the city and what the Soquel Creek Water District are doing. And Rosemary's going to talk a little bit about how that comes back and ties into our groundwater sustainability planning process. And then there'll be opportunity for some public input, some suggestions as to projects that maybe we should be considering that maybe we haven't, or just some suggestions. And then an opportunity for board discussion, including the advisory committee and going forward. So it's basically an informational meeting tonight. We're not asking the board to take any action, but we're trying to get to provide the information and the context for you as we go forward in this process. So the county and the local water agencies really have been working together since the 1950s, and there's a more detailed PowerPoint presentation in your packet. We sort of, so I'm just trying to summarize the key points of that here, but there are more details on this in your packet. The early studies really focused on reservoirs and water storage. The later studies realized that maybe reservoirs weren't such a great idea. Let's look at use of groundwater, let's look at water conservation, and let's look at development of supplemental supplies, but a lot more emphasis on groundwater storage. For mid-county, the overdraft and the threat of seawater intrusion was actually recognized in the first USGS report in 1968. And interestingly, recycled water and desalination was considered as early as 1960s. I didn't realize that until we went back and looked at some of the old studies. The county's first water master plan, 1957, identified a whole bunch of different reservoirs. And then there were subsequent updates to that water master plan. Some of you may have been around back in the 1980s. That's when we got everything together to the North County Water Master Plan. Both the land use agencies and the water agencies all met together in the Civic Auditorium. It was quite quite the event. They contributed money, they developed a plan, and then it pretty much went on a shelf, it seems like. We still weren't quite ready to start working together, but in about the late 1990s, early 2000s, we really did start to work together in earnest in a meaningful way. The various agencies talking together and looking for regional projects. One of the big ones was SCWD squared, SWID squared, the collaboration between the City of Santa Cruz and Soquel Creek Water District on the desalination project. Our integrated regional water management plan pulled together water supply, stormwater, environmental protection, conservation issues, and put it all together into one place. And out of that came some of these stormwater recharge projects that we've done on a small scale. And we're continuing these regional efforts. We're continuing to work together, consult with each other, and look for opportunities for regional collaboration. In the Mid-County area, of course, we had the Basin Implementation Group that was formed in 1995, Soquel Creek Water District and Central Water District. The Soquel-Aptos Groundwater Management Committee brought in the City of Santa Cruz and the County of Santa Cruz, and then we formed the Mid-County Groundwater Agency in 2016. This is just a map showing the 6 different reservoirs that were suggested throughout the county. And one of them was developed. The Mill Creek Reservoir, Loch Lomond Reservoir was the only one that was developed. The other ones were all on the books. Some of them were carried over into subsequent water supply plans, but we haven't seen too much progress on those more recently. City of Santa Cruz did develop the Loch Lomond Reservoir. That was somewhat of a regional project. San Lorenzo Valley Water District has a piece of the yield of that reservoir, but it's primarily a City of Santa Cruz project. And then the city also developed the Felton Diversion Dam. And interestingly, with the exception of the Scotts Valley Recycled Water Facility, that really seems to be the last water supply project that's been developed in the northern part of the county. 1977, that's a long time ago. We've been working on managing what we have more efficiently, drilling more wells, moving our wells around, but we really haven't developed any new water supply. The city went through a series of water supply plans, looking at more details of what they could do. And most recently, the Water Supply Advisory Committee brought together numerous diverse interests and laid sort of the groundwork for the city to move ahead, and you're going to hear more about that from Rosemary. Soquel Water District, again, 1968, the U.S. Geologic Survey did the first characterization of the Mid-County Basin, the Soquel-Aptos Basin, and actually identified the threat of overdraft at that time. There were some other reports that came out in the 1980s that the USGS did that were a little bit contradictory, but then we moved on ahead. Soquel Creek District formed a public advisory committee that developed the first draft integrated resources plan, a process very similar to our advisory committee that we have here. And then that plan also was updated in a series of years. Soquel also participated with Central in developing the first groundwater management plan, the AB 3030 plan for this basin. And then most recently in 2015, the district worked with the community to develop the community water plan and is now implementing the various aspects of that. So that's it for the overview. I forget who's on next.
Are you going to do it? I don't know. I thought I was on the agenda next. You can be next. I'm happy to let you be. All right. Thanks, John. That was a really good overview, and I heard a lot of really good comments about the document that's in the packet, which gives a lot of details about that and shows that we do have a long history of working together and working as individual agencies on water supply issues. So the fact that we're all here doing it again, I guess maybe that's a good thing, to think that we'll all be smarter this time, we can actually get something done, or hopefully this is not just the 2015, 18, 20 version of the thing that will be on this thing the next time. So what I want to talk about a little bit is what our water supply augmentation strategy is. It came out of the Water Supply Advisory Committee, and I want to give you a little bit of background about that and some quick updates on where we are with implementation. So let's see if I know how to work this. No.
Button on the right.
All right, so we had a 14-member city council appointed water supply advisory committee. They met from April of 2014 to October of 2015. They were a very diverse group, and they were citizens much like the folks in the advisory committee, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan Advisory Committee, coming together. They had, different levels of understanding, and so they learned really a lot, and they did really a great job of putting their arms around what the issues were and what a strategy was for going forward. Among the things that we developed during that planning process and that has since been reflected in our urban water management plan from 2015 is the fact that Santa Cruz's water demand for the next 20 years is flat, slightly declining. And it's flat and slightly declining for 3 reasons. One is existing on the books building and plumbing code changes that will require for remodels, new development, what have you, more efficient fixtures. The second one is price elasticity of demand that was built into this forecast to recognize the fact that we're going to be raising our water rates. We have raised our water rates, and that's going to affect demand, particularly in the peak season when there's more discretionary use. And then the third thing was a little bit of additional, not a little, 200 million gallons of additional water conservation from programmatic conservation over the 20-year period. So a lot of that conservation work is in place and ongoing, and I'm not going to talk too much about that tonight because that's a detail that I'm happy to talk about, but doesn't sort of rise to the occasion of some of the things we're talking about here tonight.
Can you speak up, please?
Oh, sure. Right. All right. Is this better? No.
You have to get it really close for it to work.
Well, it wasn't on. All right. So another thing is that in the projected worst year drought, given historic hydrology and some projections about climate change, the gap that we have to fill is big. It's 1.2 billion gallons off of about a 3.2 billion gallon estimated annual demand for our whole system. So this graph shows basically our various sources. The key is over there, and you can see that in the worst case kind of situation, which for us historically is 1977, 2014 was pretty darn close. We do not have enough water to reliably meet demand through the peak season. In fact, our reservoir is depleted, highly depleted during that situation. So the problem statement that the Water Supply Advisory Committee came up with and that we've been working with is the main problem is we have limited storage. We're a surface water system that is affected by low precipitation in the kinds of situations like we had in 2014 and 2015, and get into trouble pretty darn fast. But once we get reasonable rains, normal rains, we get right back out of it. But the limited storage is a really big problem for us, particularly for multi-year droughts. We have a major commitment to fish flow requirements on all of our surface water sources, the Sacramento River, the North Coast sources, and we are implementing those fish flows, and that is making a big dent in our supply also. We have this big gap, and water conservation alone is not enough to solve this problem. I think that was a really important kind of conclusion that the Water Supply Advisory Committee came to, because historically we've had a lot of great success with conservation, and so the sense was, well, more of that will solve the problem, but unfortunately that doesn't actually work. We haven't tapped it out, but we've done a lot in that, and we can't fill the kind of gap that we have at 1.2 billion gallons a year with conservation. We did several things. I think I mentioned in the memo that's in the packet that we did a very thorough and highly public review of many options for looking at supply. This was the 2016, October 2014, Water Supply Convention. There were over 40 different projects of different kinds of water supply alternatives that were showcased in this event. And following that, with these 40 plus a bunch more, we looked at over 100 alternatives of different configurations, different parts of the, various reuse approaches, for example, potable, non-potable reuse, desal, sort of the regional desal with the deep water desal kinds of things versus the local ones, gray water, decentralized systems, river catchments, those kinds of things. So it was a very thorough process, and we ended up with a set of recommendations involving implement additional conservation, look at the possibility of what's called sort of winter water harvest. There's more flow in the system in the wintertime than is used to meet current demand or fish flows. Can we capture some of that and store it either passively through in lieu service to some of our neighboring utilities that use groundwater? They'll stop pumping their wells and water levels will rise, and then we could get some of that back in a drought event, or active storage through aquifer storage and recovery. And so we have been working on these two as well as the alternatives to that, to the river water harvest, which are recycled water and desal. And the proposal is to have apples to apples comparable information in 2020 so that the city can make a decision about which project or portfolio of projects would make sense for us to meet our water supply needs for the next, increment. So just in terms of implementing, I want to talk a little bit about some of the assumptions. I know there's been a lot of, several of you have heard about water transfers and water exchanges and some possibilities there. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the assumptions we're working on and the background about what we're taking into account as we're doing our evaluations. We are looking at the possibility for in lieu transfers and exchanges, and the difference between transfers is one way. We don't expect to get anything back. Exchanges is we give something and then we create a water bank for us that we could get back at a later date. We've looked at all of the jurisdictions that we're contiguous to in one form or another. We're looking at these sort of average winter storage volumes. We know these are a little bit lower now because most of us have had some kind of a depression of demand, particularly winter demands based on the 2014-2015 restrictions that were in place. But this was the sort of total that we've been looking at, 4.5 million gallons a day of demand that if we met, then we could build some storage for our drought supply in those kinds of volumes. Aquifer storage and recovery is taking winter water, treating it to drinking water quality, putting it down by actively injecting it into a well, creating kind of a bubble of water, and then in drought events, taking that water out of regional aquifers. And so we've been doing quite a bit of work on that as well. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the assumptions that we've used in some of the analytical work on the in lieu and the ASR options. So we are assuming, again, until we have better pilot test work to document one way or another, that we would be able to return 80% of whatever we put in the ground, either passively or actively. That all available flows within existing water rights, in excess of fish flow requirements, and Santa Cruz demands may be diverted year-round. So it's whatever is available, and the way that the modeling work is done for this, it's a 70-plus year of record. So it's every year it's looked at and then come up with kind of an average that you could depend on. Obviously, the worst years you can't divert much here, but in the worst years there might be some water. And that year-round, so we're basically taking everything there is to harvest in the system within our existing water rights and within the fish flow constraints. Some of the constraints of existing infrastructure and water rights requirements, like the 20 CFS requirement for diversions from Felton, and we're diverting that into storage. And I'll tell you in a minute kind of where that gets us. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I think there's a handout there, and there's plenty of extras if people want to see these, but these are additional assumptions that we've used in developing the analysis for in lieu and ASR. We've been allowing 3 years to fill the basin, so to the 3 billion gallons, and you'll see in a minute a graph that shows kind of how that would work under a kind of a 5-year scenario with 2 years of drought at the back end. And we've refined the magnitude of the problem looking at multi-year droughts. So in assuming historical flows and 2-year worst case drought, which for us was 76, 77, the worst year shortage is about that 1.2 billion, but the 2-year shortage is 1.9 billion. So you need a bigger supply to get you through, bigger amount of water in storage to get you through a 2-year drought. In our climate change scenarios, which we've developed, the worst year drought is a 3-year drought. It's not quite as bad in the single worst year, but the 3-year drought is 2.5 billion gallons shortage. So it's that longer it goes with the limited storage that we have in our systems, the size of the shortage gets bigger. This is a graph I was mentioning, looking at kind of how we would jointly operate the groundwater storage and the reservoir storage. The reservoir storage is the red line, so, fills and empties and what have you. In the 3 years, we're diverting water to fill the storage, and then you can see that once you get into the drought of 76, 77, for example, the reservoir storage comes down and the aquifer storage comes down. And that's how we use those two conjunctively to help meet our long-term needs in that situation. So the conclusions of the work that we've done, this work has been presented at the Water Commission, it's been presented at the so-called Creek Water District, are basically in the 2-year drought scenario. INLU alone can't meet our needs because the demand that we would fill with just INLU doesn't make enough supply for us to. The demand we'd offset doesn't make enough supply for us to get what we need during the drought event. ASR would need, would meet our needs, and a combination of ASR and INLU would meet our needs. One of the purposes of this work, and you'll see the climate change, the same slide here next, but the purpose of this work is also to help us evaluate the sizing of the infrastructure. How many injection wells or how much injection well capacity do we need? How much withdrawal capacity do we need to meet whatever the size of the gap is? And so that's what the 5 MGD of injection, 4.5 MGD of withdrawal under the ASR scenario is. And you can see that because you're only the limited amount of water that's actually in the aquifer that you can take out, and the INLU only strategy is why the amount of supply there is, the MGD withdrawal capacity is smaller. This is the climate change scenario. You can see again that the injection capacity changes a little bit, but the withdrawal capacity is bigger because the size of the gap is bigger. And again, in this situation, INLU only can't solve the problem, but a combination of either INLU and or ASR will solve the problem, according to this analysis. So the current status of INLU is that we're planning for work with SoCal and some kind of a transfer to SoCal to begin in the winter of 18-19. I think there was a presentation earlier this week of the results of the water quality compatibility analysis between surface water and groundwater. There are some other issues to iron out, but if it rains this winter, we should be in a position to open the valve at the O'Neill pump station and send water to SoCal and try this on a full-scale testing for at least the 300 acre-feet that is in the existing agreement. We have ability to change that agreement. Additional CEQA work would need to be done, and obviously other things would need to be sorted out, but there is some openness to being able to do that. We're continuing discussions with other agencies about ongoing interest in water transfers, water exchanges with SoCal, Scotts Valley and San Lorenzo Valley Water District. And then we're working to refine the groundwater modeling to help us really understand the benefits to the aquifer of this kind of a strategy, plus the what water we could depend on to be returned to Santa Cruz, because it can't be just about the benefits to the aquifer for us. We have to also solve the problem that we have which is we need water and storage, or we need another source that would meet our drought supply. So an aquifer storage and recovery, we've completed a phase 1 technical analysis that looked at a whole range of parameters that need to be met, and there are no fatal flaws in any of that work. We performed system modeling to assess the availability of water for ASR and infrastructure sizing. You've seen some of the results of that. And then we're setting up to pilot test active injection, at least in the Belts wells, Belts 12 probably this winter, and also hoping to find a location up in the Santa Margarita where we can get going. We don't have a well up there that belongs to us, so a little bit hard to ask someone to take a well offline and give it to you so you can try aquifer storage and recovery when it's one of their operating wells. They're not very cooperative with that. And then we're continuing to work on groundwater modeling. So there's quite a bit of work going on looking again at how these aquifers would respond to this kind of activity and whether that would contribute to the return to sustainability of some of these aquifers. We do have a recycled water study we just finished. We're looking at a variety of about 40 alternatives of potable and non-potable reuse. But it's finished and we've submitted to the state. There are 2 small projects of non-potable reuse that are being recommended, and potable reuse options are continuing to be evaluated. So we're not where SoCal is on their potable reuse project, but we are looking at, we're continuing to look at this option. This is a graphic showing the 2 big basins, Santa Margarita Basin and the SoCal and the Santa Cruz Mid-County Basin. The water districts are shown there, and there's been a whole variety of different analytical things looking at how you could use recycled water in our system to help meet our water supply, drought supply need. There's more information about this. Again, we can talk more about it if you have questions. These are the 2 small projects, La Barranca Park, which is right above our wastewater plant. We're looking at a bulk water station there and switching that park over to recycled water, non-potable, tertiary treated wastewater, basically for irrigation. And then we're looking at a possibility of a pipeline that would take recycled water, tertiary treated wastewater up to UCSC to use for irrigation. They also have a number of buildings that have dual plumbing so that they could use that water for toilet flushing, for example. Neither of these produce enough of a demand offset to, by themselves, make much of a difference in the size of the problem that we have to solve, but they might make sense to do. They do make sense to do anyway. Finally, we've looked at seawater desal. We've done John mentioned that there was a study that the city and SoCal were working on a number of years ago. That got paused, and then the Water Supply Advisory Committee work happened. But we were looking at updating some of the basic assumptions about that desal project, and with a focus on sort of cost, timeliness, and change conditions. One of the biggest changes in the conditions is a requirement by the Coastal Commission and the State Water Resources Control Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Board, all heavy hitters, that you need to use subsurface intakes for seawater desal unless you can prove they're not feasible. And there's no definition for what's feasible and not feasible, so it's a little bit of a bring me a rock. No, I don't like that rock. Bring me a different rock. But the work on this update of the basic desal project that we've had and kind of some changes to it based on what the definition of our current needs are is going to be completed next month, and it's going to be presented to the Water Commission. So there'll be more information on that. So the finding for the desal project is it could produce the amount of water that we need to meet the moisture shortages. Costs are refined based on changing conditions, and of course they got bigger. And the timeliness of implementation of this project is a big deal. It's probably not feasible to get done in the window that we're trying to reach, which is to have a supplemental supply online by 2025. So this is just my closing slide to give you a little bit of additional work that we're going to do. I'm not going to go through all of this because you can sort of see it here, but we're actively working to bring forward these 3 options with a lot of detail that will be presented to the Water Commission and the community in a very public process that will then make some recommendations to the City Council in 2020. So we've got a lot of work to do, but we've been making really good progress, and I'd be happy to take your questions when it comes.
Yeah, go ahead. Here you go. Thank you.
To the public?
To everybody in this row, and then the second row, and then there's copies for the public. So this is a copy of my presentation that we're showing here. As Melanie does that, and we get set up, I'll give ourselves a minute. I have here the first bottling of purified water in the Western Hemisphere. I actually had 3 bottles, but I forgot my water bottle, so I only drank 1. So I'm going to give, we'll do a contest, and the first one to get right. How much groundwater does Santa Cruz use in percentage? Can anybody give me a number? Want to win a bottle? Santa Cruz, City of Santa Cruz, their groundwater supply supplies how much versus surface water?
450.
Well, let's give it in percentages.
4%? 5%.
Okay, 5%, that's it. We've got a John Kennedy here. And then how much, Soquel Creek Water District, how much surface water does it use is supplied by it? How much surface water? 0. Over here. There you go.
One thing I know is that.
What was the answer?
0. Soquel Creek Water District was developed as a flood control agency. That's why it has its name Creek in there, but it's actually 100% groundwater. So, we're going to present basically our community water plan, which the district developed in conjunction with our community. Here is our staff and a couple board members there. What's the problem? It's overdrafted, designated as a critically overdrafted basin by the state. And let's see if as you can see here in the red, down in the marina, this is all seawater intrusion that's occurred. It goes in about 8 miles into Salinas. That started in the 40s. In the 50s, it hit Moss Landing, and we detected it at a couple places here and right at Pleasure Point, and then La Selva Beach. And then, if y'all are familiar with the Denmark study that we did, very innovative. They flew off coast, and they found out that the seawater intrusion is right at the coastline. So, no time to waste. I point this out because this is a very different problem than what Santa Cruz has. They're almost all surface water, so when it doesn't rain, they're hurting, and they don't really have seawater intrusion except for a small portion of their so-called point of Pleasure. So that's the problem. Now, it's easy to look at a map like this and go, okay, I get it, I see it, and this has happened all around the world. Most populated regions of the world that rely on groundwater have seawater intrusion. Give me a place and I can tell you. So let's put a little face to this. So about a month and a half ago, this gentleman right here, Mr. Cartwright, walked into our office and we'll call Taj Kapoor, one of my colleagues, and said, I've got a problem, I need to talk to you. And he said, what is it? He goes, my well's been hit. So Mr. Cartwright has a place down in La Selva Beach, and he supplied water by us, but he has a well that provides water to about 10 acres of land that he leases out for farming. And it's a 60-year-old well, and about a year and a half, 2 years ago, it started getting seawater intrusion. He had to refund the farmer who leases his land, I think it was about $25,000, give it back to him because it's seawater intruded, it got hit. And these are 2 quotes by Mr. Cartwright. It's a small problem for each farmer, but a large problem for the county. Ultimately, it will impact the availability of safe drinking water. And just to drive the point home, here was his farm, no longer farm, and there in the background, looking inland, is probably the next to go. So what's the solution from the district's perspective in our community? Well, we developed what we call the community water plan. And it consists of really these icons right here. Conservation, is there a laser on here?
Yeah, there is. It's the middle button.
Middle button? Okay. Does that work, John?
Yeah.
This is conservation. We're all doing a fantastic job. Everybody should get up and take a bow in this room. We're using about 50, 55 gallons per day per person. That's maybe almost a third of what the state average is. Way to go. Groundwater well management. Easy to underestimate the power of this. Tasha Ford actually headed up this our effort. We've been moving wells inland and seeing a dramatic response to higher water levels at the coast. I have a graph that shows move wells inland, pump less, water levels at the coast go up. Very good technique, but we can't really do much more with that. So then these two won't solve the problem, so we have this host of supply options that I'm going to roll into. That's really going to be the focus of the presentation. I want to say here one thing, though. I think this is important to give a little insight to Soquel Creek Water District's mindset. Everybody seems to develop a favorite. I had a letter on my desk last week from a man that said he dispatched all these options and says diesel's the only way to go. And it reminds me of that cartoon from the New York Times when we were in the drought. It had a picture of California. Oh, poor California in a drought. And it had a big arrow to the Pacific Ocean saying hello like this, you know. So there's parts of the country that think diesel are the option. Other people, there's some people here tonight who are really big on river water exchanges. I know Jerry's come and presented to our agency about that. The people who are big on water reuse, they say, let's stop taking and start reusing, you know, recycling. And I think everybody has a sweet spot. This is our icon for stormwater recharge right here. It's a noble cause, but it won't solve our problem that we need to do. So we developed some mantras out of this. One is fall in love with sustainability, not a project. And I mean that because when you work hard on something or if you start getting focused, you tend to just get narrowed and they can cause biases that aren't best for our community. The other one is have a mission, not an agenda. And a couple other things that have popped out recently are, this isn't an optimization situation, which is engineers, which is the bulk of our industry. We tend to just try to nail it to the point. This is more of a risk mitigation because there's a lot of unknowns here. So to think we're going to nail this just perfectly, it's probably not good thinking. So a little bit of insurance as we go along the way might be a healthy thing. You know, to get redundant supplies like Mother Nature gave us 2 eyes, 2 lungs to protect us. Little redundancy. So, our community water plan. As Rosemary showed with the WASAC, very good effort there. We did something parallel. Process matters. We took about a year and I think 14 months or a year and a half to explore the options, evaluate and select. We had numerous meetings with our public. Every board meeting, or once a month at each board meeting, we open it up to the public and discuss this item throughout that entire period. I know some of y'all presented that are in the crowd tonight. But what came out of this, what our community said was, and this timeliness, that was the number one thing. They said, dadgummit, just do something. And I think if you looked at John's presentation, how long we've been going through this, you could see a sense of frustration on our public, our customers' faces. Water quality, everybody wants good water quality. We're not going to sacrifice that. Our board's always gone beyond the call of duty and cleaning up things. We have naturally occurring arsenic and chromium-6, and they've always done that. And reliability, they said, is paramount. We cannot afford to have seawater intrusion or game over there. You notice cost is not on here. It's important, but it didn't rank in the top 3. So, new water supplies. So, I'm going to go through each of these, as you saw on the icon, real quickly. River water transfers, desalinization, stormwater capture, and water purification, where we are at that. And again, it may not be one of these, it may be a combination that gets our community to where we need to be. So, river water transfers, I'm a very physical guy. I have to see it. So, my wife and I went up and looked at the creeks where we have a contract or an MOU with the city of Santa Cruz to do this water exchange. We call it the short term, but it's the smaller water exchange for about 300 acre feet a year. Here are the here are the creeks. Here's Laguna Creek, Vidal Creek, beautiful thing. It's been there. I just first time I've done that. And then Majors Creek. So a couple years ago, we sat down and we came up with an agreement. We split the cost on the CEQA analysis, and we have that rolling. And you know, it's some people, I just want to show how serious we are about the water transfer. So we have what we call guiding principles, and to me, they're more important than really anything we have, more important than our strategic plan, because really, when I have a question, I go back to this. And this is in our guiding principles. You know, the district is evaluating river transfers for 2 different options, North Coast, the San Lorenzo, continue to work with the city on the North Coast, and continue to work with them on the San Lorenzo River. So we're serious about this. If that's not enough, the cooperative agreement that we have in place with the city of Santa Cruz says, hey, this is really about a pilot to see if there's any beginnings of a longer term process. So not just the 300 acre feet, there's more to be had there in developing a longer term agreement. So what have we done on that? Well, last week, Taj gave a presentation, which you'll hear in August to your commission. And we've worked with top-notch people. Mark Edwards, a guy who, from Virginia Tech, did the Flint, Michigan, thank you, and many other, couple other places anyway, assisted Black and Beach on the analysis. So we developed, these are a couple of the studies, did a desktop analysis, a CEQA analysis, did some bench scale testing, jar testing, which go back and look at our last agenda and that item, you'll see all these cool pictures of how it worked out. And then we're hoping to do the full-scale pilot test coming this winter, as Rosemary said. The bench scale seems to suggest that, hey, the waters are fairly compatible. You don't want to adjust this too much with this way or that way. So we'll take it to the full-scale pilot test, hopefully in December or November if there's enough water and we meet some of the conditions that the regulators are asking us for. So, river water transfers, now let's transfer to deep water desalinization. Really, it should be desalinization. But what's going on down in Moss Landing, there's a private agency looking to do a large desalinization plant right at the heart, right at Moss Landing there, you know, where the canyon goes out. And one of our other mantras is keep as many options on the table as long as possible, because you never know how it's all going to turn out, right? As long as it makes sense. So we're keeping all these options open, even deep water desal option. We signed a memorandum of interest with them in 2015, our board did, for 1,500 acre feet. That's what we think we need to stop the overdraft and keep seawater at bay. It's a non-binding obligation. It just says we're interested. We did contribute, I think, $10,000 to the EIR to include the pipeline. It's a 15-mile long pipeline from Moss Landing to us. Then we purchased that water. I say it's definitely literally and maybe figuratively a long shot, but again, we don't want to take anything off the table. So stormwater capture, we've been working with UCSC, RCD, the county's been very involved with this. Our board asked us to go back and look at our whole area. Where could we recharge water and how much could we get? So this is just a little sample map. This background map is something that UCSC and Fisher developed. And from that, we looked at areas, and there were about 30 of them, and we scaled it down. This is just an example where, hey, it's possible we might do good infiltration. Then again, we relied on the Denmark folks. They have this little nifty device you can pull behind you that looks down into the ground and tells you, is it a good place to actually recharge water? Net result of this, we found 2 or 3 sites that may recharge 30 or 40 acre feet. So again, it's not going to solve the problem, but there's multiple benefits to stormwater recharge. So we're still looking at that option too. So now I'm going to transition to recycled water. What I'm really talking about tonight is recycled water in the form that it gets purified, and not that you can drink it directly, although the state's working on those regulations now, and obviously you see they allow it to some degree, but where you take it, you put it down back in the ground, and then you pull it out. And that's called potable reuse. So I'm going to use that term, potable reuse. So taking what happened, well, I'll show you the process. We'll walk through it. There are regulations developed. The state board has regulations to do this, and so does the World Health Organization. Texas actually already has regulations for direct potable in a couple places down there. Been doing it, and our state is working on that now. But our project is not for direct potable. It's only to take the water, purify it, put it in the ground, let it sit for a while, let some of it create a barrier, and then pull some of it out. Is that clear? So, potable water reuse has been happening. It's been happening in Orange County since, I don't know, about 40 or 50 years. That's who did these bottles of water and gave them to us. And then there's all these other places around the state that it's getting ready to go. I read a statistic a couple months ago, 75% of the water agencies are looking to do this now. Silicon Valley's doing it. They've got a rather big plant. Monterey is doing it too. They just started construction on their plant, very similar to ours. They take ag runoff also. So I'm doing this because I feel like I'm trying to correct some or put out some information where we hear the biggest concerns regarding recycled water, because what we found, and this is a study we did and it's replicated everywhere, is about 55% of the people are generally for recycled potable water like this. But what happens is when you give them just a few facts, that number jumps up to the high 70s. So I think we got 75% acceptance once we educate. So we feel that's very important, otherwise we feel we put our customers at a disadvantage in making probably the best, the best decision they could. We don't get all the information. So, Pure Water SoCal, what it is planned on doing is taking 25% of the 8 million gallons a day of treated wastewater that goes out to the Monterey Bay. It's collected down here near the lagoon, and they treat it and push out 8 million gallons a day on average to the sanctuary. So what we want to do is take some of that treated secondary water, that'd be our source right here, from the outfall basically, purify it, and I'm going to go through and talk about what that really is, just so you're sure understand it, and then take it in a pipe, put it in a well, let it sit, and it infiltrates down and recharges the aquifers below. And this is exactly what some of the other agencies in Orange County does. So let's examine this a little bit more. So what is that middle part, that mysterious middle part of advanced treatment? Well, I'm going to show you. So right here is what City of Santa Cruz and the county did down in area lagoon. They do primary and secondary treatment, and it's pretty good water. You get a bottle of it's clear. It doesn't even smell at that stage. Actually, the testing we did just met all the MCLs. I don't know if that's good or scary, but it did. It met all the MCLs, not the pathogens, the MCL. So the water's in decent shape, but not good enough to drink. What we want to do, and we all, by the way, this is the heavy lift. This is a big lift in cleaning up the water. We all pay, if you own a house, you pay $750 a year, at least if you live in the county, for this portion alone, right here. So the big lift's already done. So we want to take that and put it through all these fancy things, MF, UF. This is just microfiltration, reverse osmosis, and advanced oxidation, UV light basically. What this is a filter 1/300th the size of your hair. It goes through there, it takes out some of the viruses, bacteria, a few things like that. Gets rid of them, physical removal. And then you come up to RO. Oh man, this stuff is good. It basically removes everything. Everything except that's really low molecular weight. Like there's a byproduct that people often talk about. MDMA, people are worried about, has a low molecular weight, I think of like 70 atomic mass units or something. My son just had a study for a chemistry test for college entrance, so I'm calling it up. Anyway, that does get through. However, this takes care of that. It destroys it. So this process is robust, very robust. And there's years and years, 50 years of data showing this. I don't want to pull out a bunch of data because you're tired, you're kind of going, but what I will show you is what kind of changed me And, our whole board was like, okay, if we're gonna look at this, we gotta make sure we're feel comfortable with this, Our customers are expressing, curiosity. So we did a couple things. And before I jump to that, here's what the facility would basically look like. This is San Diego's pure water facility that actually just certified the EIR unanimously through the council down there. But their demo plant is about the size of our plant. This is 1 million gallons per day, ours would be 1.3. So here are the RO units, here are the microfiltration units, and on the other side is the UV. So it'd be about a little bit longer, and it extends out about half the width here. Santa Cruz, it's a combination of people that went on that tour. So there it is. That's basically it. If you want to see what that facility would look like constructed, they made it open so people could see it. So going back to water quality, knowing it's a concern, our board hired a independent panel. And we did. We had to hire them. It was hard. We paid them. So full disclaimer there. But this is Karen Nelson from UC Berkeley. I won't go through the names, but it's a who's who kind of in this area if you've worked in risk and that kind of thing, which was my previous job. I was so excited to meet some of these people. And they came together, they provided oversight. The bottom line is, here's their conclusion. The panel concludes that the project is plausible, feasible, and protective of human health. And use of this advanced treatment technologies that I just showed you is proven. It meets all requirements to protect their health. They did say, hey, it's rather on the small side, but you got to do what you got to do. This was the headline in the Sentinel there. So they hired that, and they've been oversighting and saying, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and we've been following what they said. Now, that was great, and I believed it. And then what kind of got me going was this woman from Berkeley on the left, Dr. Nelson. In her presentation here, she talked about de facto water use. And that means, she goes, we've been doing this all, Europe's been doing it forever, we've been doing it forever in the United States. And what she meant was, all the towns back east, and even some around here, have been taking water out of a river, using it, and dumping their influent back in the river, treated as secondary standards. Then the next town comes out, uses conventional surface water treatment, treats it, uses it, and dumps it back in the river, right? And so here's an example. I just want to give you one example. This is northern Atlanta. This is the Chattahoochee River. I love that name. It means painted rock. And here is a discharge of 25 million gallons a day of secondary effluent into the Chattahoochee. Here they are pulling out 65 million gallons, and then down below they're dumping in another 80 million gallons a day. Now, what I don't show is up to here, Lake Lenore. I used to live back in this area, you may detect an accent. About a 30-mile drive, there's probably 10 of these places dumping in. I have a map of secondary effluent. So mind you, this river is largely composed of secondary effluent with regular river water. They pull it out and treat it to conventional treatment. That's okay, but then we thought, well, we're kind of doing the same thing, except we don't have that 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 or 10-to-1 dilution of the river, right? Because we're taking just secondary effluent. But we're treating it more than you would treat surface water, regular surface water treatment. So I wish I had another bottle. That's what this bottle was for. So how many times more stringent is potable reuse treatment over surface water treatment for pathogen removal? So we're basically treating similar waters, but how much more is it required by the regulators to treat the secondary that comes straight out of the sewage plant there than versus when it comes out of the river? Anybody want to guess? 10 times, 100 times?
500.
Come on, John.
500.
500. Good. Way off. Anybody else? Come on, give me a number. Just have fun with it. 1 million. Who would be so foolish? 100 million. 100 million times more for the treatment of pathogens. So when I saw this, when we realized this, that was a game changer for me. And I tell you that because everybody's worried about water quality because we haven't seen this much, we haven't seen this done, and change is hard for us. So anyway, we'll move on. The other big thing people are concerned about, and rightfully so, I'm not here to diminish anything, I'm here to show the science to help aid, is if you put this down in the ground, if you do recharge the aquifers, and if something did happen, there's multiple barriers, multiple testing, and I've just gone through the water quality, could it impact everybody's aquifer throughout the county? Could it contaminate us? And the answer is no. Here is the groundwater model results. These are in our draft EIR, which I'm going to get to in a minute. This is one example. This is over at Twin Lakes in Cabrillo College, with a model simulation where we put the water down. It's expected to be recharging the well. And this is the particle tracking. The way this model works is the groundwater, they model the groundwater flowing out through a particle tracking method been used for years. And this right here is the red is the 8-year mark. This is the 25-year mark, how the water is moving out. The reason it kind of, in gradient, the water naturally flows from up here down to here. So you would expect all the water to go like this, except we have some wells here and here that kind of pull it back a little bit. Our big wells do, so that's why you see that. So relatively contained and doing exactly what we wanted to do. Right here is one of the hot spots determined by the hydrologist, over 50%, higher than 50% opportunity for seawater intrusion. And we already have it nearby, so we picked a good spot. So a couple closing slides. Pure Water SoCal. Cost estimate is $90 million. There's a range there. And I'll say the $90 million, because we want to try to be as genuine as we can, that's at midpoint construction, so we've inflated the dollars there. We're not doing today's dollars, and that helps with grant matches. So we've been very fortunate thus far in developing our relationships with grants. All of Scotts Valley, I saw Perret here, Santa Cruz and us came together, and we all got this $75,000 feasibility study grant. Very appreciative of that. Thank y'all. And then the Bureau of Reclamation saw what we were doing, and we talked to them. And they said, oh, that's an interesting project. This is all state, right? This is feds. And even though we don't get Bureau of Water, they control half the water in the West, they said, it's interesting enough project, we'll give you $150,000 to take that feasibility study and make it up to par for us so you can apply for more grant money. And so then, during that time, recently the state has awarded us $2 million to do a Prop 1 planning grant. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where it gets fun. The potential grants out there. Both these entities actually changed their criteria, partly due to us banging on their door, going to their board meetings and stuff, and other agencies too, but especially the state board, to accommodate our type of project. It let us in the door, and when they give you the planning grant, they really want to give you the construction money because they've got an investment. So we're in the midst of applying for this grant right now, and the Bureau of Rec, we were a couple, Tom LeHue and Bruce Daniels, we've been to Denver, I don't know, about a month and a half ago, met with their people there, met with some people in DC. They're putting our project on the name letter to go to Congress, which makes us eligible for this money right here. So that's a good step. I don't think we'll get it all, but I think we'll get it. I have high hopes. I feel good about getting a good chunk. We're certainly going to try it. It's the best thing we can do for our customers. So with that, most optimistic, 90 minus 70, which is this, is a $20 million project. And in reality, I hope we get a large chunk of this, and this may come out in $1 or $2 million increments if we're fortunate. That's usually the way it works. So what's the time frame? Pure Water SoCal. Well, we're in the midst of the EIR is out, and actually I have packets for each of the committee members, advisory committee and the boards, with the community, what do we call it? The community guide of the EIR, because the thing's pretty thick, and we have some copies for the public, and it's online if you want it. We'll give that out right after this, and then, so that's out. It's comment time on that. Please submit your comments. We really do appreciate it. It helped the first time we went out. We got some great comments, and the board revised a lot of stuff, and we went back out. So the final EIR should be out in the end of the year roughly, and if the EIR certified, if we would move forward with design and construction with the goal of replenishing the basin in that time frame, maybe having some water to provide back to Santa Cruz City.
Okay, thank you, Ron. So next on the list here is the process in relation to the groundwater sustainability plan and roadmap.
I was so mesmerized that Okay, so these two graphics, I just want to take a minute on. They're in your packet.
I think the mic's not on.
Thank you. There you go. All right. These two graphics are in your packet. I don't actually think I can use this because they're too very connected. So the point of this was really to show the relationship of the projects to the ultimate product that we have to create here, use technology, right? Okay, so the basic project we have to create is we have to have a management plan that includes projects and a financing plan, the program implementation. So how are we going to meet the sustainability criteria? What are they? What do we want them to be? And then what is the projects and management actions that will get us there? And what is the plan implementation, including financing? Now, this document does not say that MGA has to do the projects. It does not have to say that. It just has to say how the projects are going to get done, which is sort of gets to Dr. Daniel's questions about, well, who's going to do them and how do we want to think about that? And that's certainly a conversation that we will definitely need to have before we can finalize this plan. But nevertheless, the projects are an element. This is the requirement of the project section right here, section 4, which has to describe for each project how the measurable objectives that are set will be expected to benefit from the project or action, expected benefits, how they will be evaluated, how they'll be accomplished, what are the estimated costs, and the management actions and plans to meet those costs. So this basic graphic shows that all of the stuff from section 2, which is the basin setting, feeds into the conversation that, for example, the advisory committee's been having about minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, undesirable results. Those will come out, this will produce some goals that we'll use, feed the model with, and then in order to solve the problem, you have to have some kind of set of projects that go back into it. And there's an opportunity for iterating this to sort of fine-tune the balance between what projects you're doing and how they will achieve these objectives. Until this is all finished, for example, one of the things that, I'm going to ask you to move to the next graphic, please. Yeah. And the process funnel graph, which you'll also see here, which was done by Georgina King, very
sorry, give it a second.
easing us one to the other. It shows the iterative process. So basically, in the first phase of the work that the committee's been doing since the first of the year, they've been working to understand the basin conditions, terminology, and what their role is. They've done an initial design. They haven't really talked too much about projects and management actions until now, but they've been working on preliminary minimum thresholds, impact assessment. This will be modeling. It'll produce a result. They'll have a chance to see how did some of the preliminary minimum thresholds that they chose affect the results here? And, do they want to make them more stringent, less stringent? So there's a refinement process here involving the same kinds of activities of looking at the management actions and minimum and projects, more modeling, obviously refining the project and management actions and the minimum thresholds, and then to the final design. This will be the process that will occur kind of after in the beginning, the first half of 2019. But between now and the end of this year, we're going to be in this process, and finalizing the end of this process. So projects are a key element of the planning process. again, I want to clarify, it doesn't require this agency to say we're going to own and operate these projects, and that's a big question that the MGA board in particular may want to have conversations about in consultation with the advisory committee or not, but it's really a process where we can't achieve what we need to achieve and in putting a plan together that will meet the state's requirements without talking about projects in some detail, because you can see from the other graphic, there's quite a bit of requirements for us to describe how those projects would affect the basin. That's why we're talking about them now, and that's why we'll be talking about them more as in the weeks to come.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. And now we're going to have some time for, I think, how many community members want to present their plan? Mr. Jerry Paul and those two. Okay. So if you could, you can choose who wants to go first, but you now have that time. Maybe 5 minutes each, sound good? Okay.
I need about 8.
8 minutes? Okay.
7, 8 minutes.
Okay, so 15 minutes is fine. We'll give you guys 15 minutes. Just trying to let you know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's the slide.
Yeah, he's got it.
You're going to give the one that Scott said. Yeah, okay, great.
Anyway, we are the Water for Santa Cruz County group, and we wanted to study the feasibility of transferring river water so that we can start replenishing the aquifer right away. The transfers would help to achieve the regional water security, of course. It's just one of the many answers to the problem. If anybody has any questions at all about anything that I'm talking about or what's on the graphs or anything, we ask that you do email us at that address, and somebody will answer you within 2 days. It just depends on what the questions are, who has the expertise in that area, and so on. Next one. The purpose of this presentation, of course, is to make our statement. And the WSAC recommended that water transfers were the top solution, simply because of availability, cost, and safety. The water chemistry study of Santa Cruz surface and Soquel Creek Water District groundwater indicates that the waters are compatible. So we won't have any problems per se. That there might be slight adjustments and stuff, but nothing radical. The water transfers are a go as far as we know now, because Santa Cruz and everyone has been working with Soquel Creek Water to work on the transfers. Next one. Next slide. Oh, there we go. Sorry. These were the 3 questions that we really were concerned about. We had dozens of them, but we really narrowed it down to 3 major ones. One was, how much water does the North Coast have to ship? Well, you'll see on the next slide, we have the answers, but there's plenty of water to ship now, and it will really get the ball rolling as far as replenishing the water in the aquifer. How much did Santa Cruz replace water sent to the Soquel Creek customers? And then, is there infrastructure present and significant enough to treat and transfer the water? Next slide. So as you see here, there's 671 million gallons per year available. The transferred water represents no risk to Santa Cruz per se. As far as we could figure, it looks safe and everything, because Santa Cruz has water rights to 900 million gallons out of the San Lorenzo River, and it typically does not use it. Of course, with droughts and things like that, figures vary, but you'll see a little bit later in this presentation that even during a critically dry year, we can still transfer water. The infrastructure is already in place to treat and transfer 1.4 million gallons a day, which is, of course, 500 million gallons a year. And more can be transferred at a later date just by enlarging the size of the pipes. Next one. Here, this is just a lot of information. It'll give you about Santa Cruz, where they get their water, what's available to them, and then what's total. What was it? The Soquel Creek right here, and the totals down here will give you everything out of that part. Then these up here are just additional information about where water can come from and that sort of thing. As you read it, it makes a lot of sense, and we simplified it as much as we could. Okay, next one. Santa Cruz has abundant water in wet and normal years. What about the dry years? Next one. 2018 is a critically dry year, and it was declared a drought emergency. Yet even in this year, the San Lorenzo River produced 669 million gallons in 2 months. So the water could have been harvested, transferred, but instead it just went out to the ocean. So these are just, things that we want to make sure that everybody understands, is that we're not taking more water from anywhere. It's just, a lot of it's just water that's already going out to the ocean. Next. This graph here shows the harvesting in a critically dry year, and it's just shows what Santa Cruz, the fish, Santa Cruz, the brown is the Soquel Creek, and so it just shows you how much percentage of the water is used and things. But even in a critically dry year, we found that we won't harm the fish if we take out the amounts that we've been talking about. Of course, if it's a really wet year, we can pump even more water out of the rivers. Okay, next slide. Again, this is just showing the graphs of how much water is available, and you'll see it here, if we got it right, 16, 17, in here, this is where this year was, right here, and we would still be able to harvest water and not harm the fish, and that's just shows you what's there. And here, the classification system just tells you, it shows you in the dry year and wet year and normal and everything. So it's all self-explanatory, but if you have any questions about it, again, give us a call or email us, and we'll be glad to take care of any questions that you have about it. And it's simplified from what we originally had, and you should be able to get a lot of information out of just that. Next one. So in conclusion, there is water available, and the water has been shown to be compatible between the aquifer and the river water. The infrastructures already exist, and the Santa Cruz Water Department has publicly indicated its willingness to transfer water, which this was something we had to overcome because there was some misunderstandings and things, but everybody's worked together. We've got a lot done, and we're really happy about all of that. And then given these facts, of course, we urge all parties to double their current efforts to make this a go and get this water moving and get that aquifer filled. This is just one step, but it's doable. It's doable now, and hopefully by December this year, we'll have water running into the aquifer. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Paul.
And by the way, who are you?
Oh, I'm Gary Lindstrom, yes.
You okay?
Would somebody care to push, well, I need this for one. Well, so.
Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Slides. I can advance the slides if you prefer that.
The pointer's on the same thing, so thanks anyway. I think I'm.
We can advance the computer if you just want to use the pointer. On the computer, they can advance.
They can advance for you, you can still use the pointer.
All right. Very good. Thank you. I'm Jerry Paul, resident of Santa Cruz, and since about 2010, I've been attending meetings of many agencies, perhaps 15 altogether, and harassing people about aquifer alternative for recharging the aquifers very quickly at very low cost. I'm here partly to answer your questions. When I have asked many of you in official positions, what is it about aquifer, that is hard for you? You've given me questions, and I'm trying to answer them, many of them in this talk. I'm providing 17 pages for the public record. Do you have that? If you don't, would you please distribute those for me?
So the board doesn't have this at all?
I thought that was somehow electronically they'd be in your inbox or something.
Well, you need to promise that you will get them.
Oh, yes, I'll do that. It's what you see here. What I'm going to do is give the principles, the key points, and then use the spots in the talk to answer your questions that I've gathered over the years. One question is, or claim or issue is, several of you have said, I'm responsible to my constituency and no others. And it sounds very reasonable, and technically, legally, that's literally the case. However, I believe that in this situation, your constituency is much better off if you cooperate with each other. And incidentally, I'm delighted to see all the cooperation that's been displayed on the screen and in the room in these many meetings. So it's something that I'm delighted with, and I'm ever to do more of. Only with a greater sense of urgency. We lose a well, we lose not just the well, we have to replace it, and it means the transportation of the water to the affected area. And in the time it takes to do that, it becomes a quintuple whammy, because we lose other wells in the process of the time we lost. Next, please. Aquifer, in as little as 3 years, should be able to make, 3 years of operation, full operation, should should make the region drought-proof against an 8-year drought. And this is a condensation of a longer statement by Gary Fisk, the computer consultant for the convergence model. And since then, slightly stiffer criteria have been applied, but the numbers haven't changed much. Similarly, aquifer, being huge, should fill all the local aquifers in the middle half of the county within about a decade. So it's the biggest thing that's in the forefront right now. It's been said that we have a water shortage problem. What we really have is a water storage problem. And we have plenty of storage space. The aquifers collectively are 3 to 6 times bigger than Loch Lomond. Next, please. This is just a aquifer pedigree, are we credible? And It started with a dozen professional civil engineers and geology professors in 2010, and we've been as intimate as possible with WASAC, and you'll see that Portfolio 70 is the name of aquifer in the WASAC materials. Aquifers improved a lot. It doesn't need as much water treatment as we thought in WASAC, and a few other things. The cost has gone down radically. Next, please. The values in aquifer don't just have to do with water. Saline, encouragement, sustainability, the people's money is one thing that I haven't heard mentioned here a lot. But I believe that aquifer could save this area as much as $300 or $400 million by providing so much water for such low cost. Certainly will save energy. And of course, this money makes the prices of local businesses and institutions higher if you spend more on water. It also can help the private pumpers by helping the aquifers. Fish habitat. The lock will be able to be used flexibly for fish in a way that might make fisheries regulators give us water rights more readily and stop the tension and really help improve the ecosystem. One thing that's been said is, don't worry, our expensive scheme has grant money, and grant money is taxpayer money. Aquifer also welcomes grant money, but needs a lot less of it. Next, please. Here's a comparison, general, not to how can I say, not very precise, but very instructive. Aquifers in the yellow stripe. You look down here, there's not just capital costs, but there's the extra operating and maintenance costs that RO systems in general have compared to the kind of system Santa Cruz has today, or SoCal has today, or aquifer would be. And then there's finance costs on all this. The sum of those three is shown in this column. For aquifer, we're thinking $45 million. This is 30-year operation and maintenance cost, by the way, the excess of it, not just the regular, what people are paying for water today. So $45 million for aquifer, about $160 million for recycled wastewater, like a Pure Water SoCal, approximate number. And the capacity, million gallons per year, for aquifer is 1,350, and that includes not just what is sent, but you also subtract what is sent back to Santa Cruz. So that's the net average. And 475, so we've got 3.5 times less cost and 3 times more water. The value comparison between aquifer and Pure Water SoCal is aquifer is 10 times better. 10 times the bang for the buck. Another thing I'd like to point out here is the rain check for fish. To store water in the lock until May or until when fish need it is one big advantage that we can't do really well right now because we're trying to keep the lock full against drought. Whereas if the lock job were given to the aquifers to protect us against drought, the aquifers are many times bigger, and it frees up the lock to be used for fish in a flexible way. Also, the big job is to scoop the river water out of the river, which you can't do if the lock is already full, like it tends to be right now. Right now, it's at 96%. If we can, let's see, rain check for fish. Notice how low these numbers are. Fish don't carry wallets. It's part of the problem with the fisheries regulators and the water rights. They can stop us from getting water rights if we don't do what they think we should do about the fish. And here, we can provide cheap water to fish with aquifer, and flexibly, any time of year. We can also run it through the aquifers around Scotts Valley and have cold clean water, targeted very specifically.
Excuse me, Jerry, just want to let you know you've used 8.5 minutes already, and you're only on your 5th slide, so. Yeah.
Thank you. I believe you're going to want aquifer anyway, even if you do something else. Because there's such a huge amount of water at a small expense, 10 times better deal. And because fish don't carry wallets, and to stay way ahead of climate change and sea level rise. We're talking 1 decade instead of 2 next one. Here's how much water is in various things. The flow of the San Lorenzo River is, Santa Cruz only uses 7% of what's in the river. SoCal demand is 40% of Santa Cruz demand, and Santa Cruz demand is about the same as the capacity of the lock. So SoCal uses about 40% of what's in the lock. And the way aquifer would work is that of that 40% that would go to SoCal, only 30% would come from the lock, and 10% would come from the river directly, because it would be in winter time in that case. Next, please. Just said this part. Besides satisfying all of SoCal's demand, most years, we can inject some, once the wells are shut off in SoCal because they're getting their water from Santa Cruz, we can put water down those wells, use them in reverse, as was talked about earlier. So we can actually supply more than the entirety of SoCal's demand. Fire hoses. This is the biggest issue why people are confused about cost. Most water systems are like a string of 10 fire hoses. If you pinch any one, you don't get water out the end that you need. Right now, for aquifer, 4 hoses are pinched. The water rights at Felton, diversion device to take more water out of Felton, widening of the pipeline from Felton to the lock, and the potable water tower across 41st Avenue from Santa Cruz to SoCal. With those things brought into to be a match set with the others, we'll have 10 fire hoses that are matched, and the cost for that is about $35 million altogether. Very cheap. In fact, if SoCal offered to pay it close to $35 million, Santa Cruz would get a water system for free, and SoCal could use its grants to reimburse itself for $35 million. We could basically have a water system for free in the entire region. Next, please. In Scotts Valley, we have another treatment. It's called dry time surface spreading. It lets water go down in the aquifers, and what escapes feeds the fish. Next, please. So we're going to install a well, widen 2 pipelines, jointly apply for water rights. And I'm happy to say that that's been started. That's a really key thing. Next, please. You've seen this before, but I wanted to point out the fish sandwich here. Fish, Santa Cruz, SoCal, the lock, and fish. The part that goes to the lock needs to be 30 MGD. That's what this yellow stripe is. And with that, if you take that and add it up, it's 1,200 million gallons. It's more than SoCal's 80 million. And this is from 2018, which is a critically dry year, this year. So even in a critically dry year, if we get the water rights to do this, you can fish the water, their share first, then Santa Cruz, then SoCal, then the lock, in that quantity. And if the pipe is big enough to the lock, we can really make hay. And it's not that risky anymore. Next, please. Here's a histogram that you also saw before, 2018 at the bottom of the page. On this graph, the blue, that's the important part. Notice that SoCal's entire demand here, and then some, is being satisfied in the wet years and the normal years. And then as a matter of degree, as the years get drier and drier, the amount that Santa Cruz has left over to send to SoCal descends. Then there's a period here with the asterisk where Santa Cruz won't send any to SoCal, but SoCal won't send any to Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz will be getting water from Scotts Valley and from the Belts wells and other little things. And so it's only in this little area here that SoCal sends water back to Santa Cruz. So it's about a 6-to-1 ratio. So we're 4 steps ahead of Chairman Mao. We're taking 6 steps forward and 1 step back. And that is workable. Next one, please. Here is a map on how we get to the numbers. Next one, please. Bottom line is 450 acre feet or 1,350 mg, a million gallons per year. And that weighted average, in other words, after that includes the water being returned to Santa Cruz. So it's 2.7 times more water than the Groundwater SoCal. So this thing hauls off and just really blows up the aquifer fast. Next please. This is sort of a repeat in the next one. So what happens is a lot of times in looking at the 10 fire hoses, people are talking about a different set of fire hoses. They'll either leave one off or add something superfluous, and so we get these different answers. And I'd like to invite you to try to stay close to the aquifer spec when you're quoting these things. One time there was a quote that added $200 million to the aquifer because of raising the locks dams, and it's not needed. Or ASR injection, don't need to do it in the aquifer. Charging more than the necessary boost in supply. There was a groundwater treatment plant improvements which pertain to all the water of Santa Cruz, not just the incremental water that would be sent to SoCal, and things like that. So we need to match up. These are the numbers, how many MGP for each thing. So this is what the check again. Next. Please act. Please write the $100 million letter or $700 million, get the ball rolling right away, and please talk to people who are decision makers. This is a real deal, and we need to act urgently. We're almost ready to go. Thank you so much for letting me speak here. Any questions?
For all of your work.
You're welcome.
I'll turn the mic back. So what's left is thank you very much to both the public members and Rosemary and Ron for presenting. Now it's an opportunity for board discussion related to those topics. Seeing anyone? Yes, John.
Question, Ron, when would the pure water actually come online to deliver in the projection we had there? When would it actually be starting to do its full capacity?
I may need a call for a lifeline to my colleagues. I'm going to say 2023 is what we're aiming for.
I couldn't see that on this slide.
Yeah, okay, 2023.
Any other discussion items, questions? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Rosemary, the withdrawal from ASR would be in drought periods only, or would it be regular?
No, well, it kind of depends a little bit on the characteristics of the aquifer that we would discover when we did pilot testing. But in general, the idea would be to store quantities of water and in wet years or normal and wet years, and then use that water in dry years. It's one of the questions that has to be asked is how much water that you put down and how long does it have to, will you be able to get that full volume, or what's the volume you can get back over a longer and longer period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
So was the idea that the injection would take place in the wet years, the wet months?
Yes. Well, the analysis that Gary did took all the water that was available above fish flows and meeting Santa Cruz demands and within water right constraints, and took every drop of water day in, day out, 365 days a year, and said this water can go into storage or be used for inload. That's how it was done. That's probably not a practical application for a lot of different reasons, so there would be, but it was a sort of sizing thing. But the idea would be that you would end up mostly taking it in the wet months when it's available above fish flows and within the water rights constraint.
And not necessarily pulling it back out until it was needed.
Right.
Which would be when it was dry and it was also a lower than normal supply time for the city.
Yeah, it's really, for us, the issue is just like this winter, even though it was, we had a really dry December and a pretty dry February. We didn't really have much in the way of precip until about March and April. We're at about half of normal precip in Santa Cruz for this water year, which starts 1st of October. So we get into a trouble situation fairly quickly, even though the reservoir was reasonably full. For us, the issue isn't what's happening this year. It's going to rain next year. And if we didn't do something to give a little bit of a highlight to folks about, being aware, and we hadn't had that March and April rain, we probably would have been in a more significant stage of curtailment. Not because we didn't have enough water to get us through this year, but it doesn't rain the second year in a row or the third year in a row, that's really big trouble for us. And I don't know if you've seen the recent, from the state hydrologist, looking at what he calls weather whiplash. So it's like multiple years of drought followed by maybe a reasonable year and then really wet, which is kind of what we've had. And they're projecting that the climate may be changing to these more extreme events, which makes us even more vulnerable, right? It's sort of like too much water in 17, more than, way too much, but way not enough in 14, water year 14 and water year 15.
So the one thing I'm just trying to understand with the city's ASR idea is it that there would be additional water that would be put into the mid-county aquifer more so than was pulled back to the city, except in extreme periods of time?
Well, so this is one of the big issues that we're looking for modeling to help us to really understand. Right. Because for us, if the threat to the mid-county aquifer of seawater intrusion is such that we could put in 10 gallons, but we could only expect to get back 1, because we need to maintain the seawater barrier basically, or it might be 1 in the first 5 years, it might be 3 in the second 5 years as the basin begins to recover. But in the near term, if we can't get back that 80% of what we're putting in, which may not be a reasonable assumption to make in the mid-county basin, then it doesn't mean we wouldn't do it. But it does mean that we would have to look elsewhere for something else that would help us meet our needs while the basin was recovering so that we could get back. It might be a good long-term investment, but it might be a terrible short-term investment.
It's clearly a very complex issue, and I think the water model indeed is going to be the key to solve this. And by the way, there's going to be a TAC meeting in about 2 weeks to review some of the model parameters and so forth. But I think it's worthwhile to look at what Scotts Valley has done. They've had a model for quite a bit of time, and they've looked at some of these kind of issues. And they were talking about what happens if we had a recycle plant and put 600 acre-feet of water into our basin every year. And indeed, it started off going up and up and up and then started slowing down. And after about 30 years, it flattened off. So they put 600 acre-feet in every year, but the basin doesn't go up anymore. That's because what you've done is by raising groundwater levels, it means the flow to the streams has increased. And if you turned it off and didn't put the 600 acre-feet in, it would start going back down again. They also did a study that said, okay, what happens if a drought happens and we need to actually take some of that water and use it? And within 3 years, it had gone down below where it started from. So after 30 years of getting up there, they took water out, and in 3 years it was below zero, if you will. And so those are tricky things. And as I said, one of the issues about sharing the basin is in a bad year, we might not get much, if any, river water sent to the district basin, or the county, the agency basin. We might not get much recharge from precipitation, and the district would need to take water out for its customers, and the city would need to take its 1.2 billion gallons out for their customers. So the basin would get hit really hard. And what that would do to things, we really need to understand before we go any further.
And we're assuming that the mid-county basin is similar to what happened in Scotts Valley, and that you put this amount in, and it's going to go somewhere, to the ocean or to the streams. I wanted to give an opportunity for the Groundwater Sustainability Advisory Committee members to ask questions. Do you have any?
I guess I have one just general question that just came up when everybody was talking, and that relates to damage control with any of the options or facilities, or if there's a disaster or earthquake, or there's infrastructure, if we're putting all eggs in one basket or several baskets, how are any of these plans responding to terrorism, contamination, arson, earthquake, all those sorts of things? That's something that's being discussed in the planning and design of these different options.
My first thought, and maybe wrong, that's what's so important about having a diversified portfolio. You don't have all your eggs in one basket. You have multiple different potential sources.
Yeah, and Melanie just wrote a great article on this. It's looking to Mother Nature for how to design a resilient system, because obviously species have been evolving in that. And so one is duplication. There goes the 2 eyes, 2 lungs kind of thing. Compartmentalization. So different things, different places, so different water supplies. So we've looked at those and that type of what it suggests, and trying to mimic some of those in our solutions to what Mother Nature has to offer. If you read the last editorial in our article in Aptos Times, you'll see some of those principles laid out.
So the one thing I could add is that because of the way the Water Supply Advisory Committee recommendations came together, they didn't recommend a specific project, right? They recommended a process going forward for creating more comparable information around a range of projects. And they created a decision process that includes criteria, cost, timeliness, a sort of how many yield that you can get, and a series of additional criteria, including sort of robustness, which means, ability to adapt. One thing they called adaptive flexibility, which is, well, we don't really know what's going to happen with climate change, but we probably need to make sure that whatever we do has some adaptability built into it so that we can take what comes. And as we've been doing system design and preparation for really major capital reinvestment in the Santa Cruz water system, we are definitely looking at those questions for the water system infrastructure as well as the supplies. So those are definitely on the minds of the folks in our organization who are working on these things. And you can't, I've been about 4.5 years, and I've had one of the driest years in history and one of the wettest, and those were 2 years apart, plus a couple of others that were somewhat more normal. But there's been a lot of variability, and the conditions at the low end of the spectrum in terms of reliability of supply and infrastructure, and the high end in that wet year of 17 winter in terms of the reliability of the infrastructure and the sources of supply, have been a really big lesson about what kind of variability we might need to be really dealing with and planning for our infrastructure and our supplies.
Good question, Mitch.
I know the hour is late, but it's kind of a multi-pronged question. Ron, I guess you're up first. Just quickly, you talked about the deep water desal plan in Monterey County, talked about a 15-mile pipeline. How realistic is that, getting access to that, if that were an option down downriver, so to speak?
Well, again, as serious as the implication is, you don't want to take anything off the table unless it just costs you too much or there's some force to it, as long as it's out there. I would say Monterey has its own set of conditions that might make us look simple in a sense. So what I'm saying is they have a hierarchy of processes they're going through. They have Pure Water Monterey, which is first on the list. The second one is a Cal D-cell. And Jonathan, help me, because you know better than I do, you work down there, that if that happens, then I would say Deepwater D-cell is much less likely to happen. If the Cal D-cell doesn't happen, which is the second prong, then maybe Deepwater D-cell.
How about accessibility? A 15-mile pipeline. Can you get access to it?
It's in public right of way.
It is.
Yeah, it's doable. Yeah, our engineers have looked at it, costed it, and like I said, it's in the.
Doesn't mean it's cheap.
Okay.
No, and the price of water is quite expensive. It actually doubled from when they first entered the MOI, so that's kind of backed us off a little bit.
And then you mentioned the stormwater recharge option. And if I understood you right, you just said that you guys identified just 2 or 3 spots that you found appropriate for recharge.
We looked out through a whole entire area, and when you start overlaying factors like runoff and suitability, you may say the whole area looks good, then you go, well, it doesn't, it's too steep, so take that portion out, and what you end up with is about 30 sites. And then from those 30 sites, other factors come into play. So it reduced down to about a handful of sites, some of them on the golf course, which just went up for sale. So that threw a little monkey wrench into that, but we're still working on it.
And then on the potable water reuse, I know I was so close in my estimation.
Yeah,
I was so close. Half credit, 500 versus 100 million.
We have more of it. Yeah.
Oh, he's going to make me drink. No, he baited me. He got me very good. I owe him on that one. In terms of the EIR, where are you in terms of narrowing down the likely location?
That's a great question. I didn't go into that, but what we have in the EIR is called a component-based EIR. So there's 3 potential sites for the facility. One is at City of Santa Cruz wastewater treatment facility. One is near Santa Clara. I've been saying Santa Clara. So anyway, and then the other one is next to our facility. We own a piece of property, and it could even be split. Maybe tertiary treatment happens, let's say down at the wastewater treatment facility, because that's part of your plan, and we just polish the water at one of these other 2 facilities. And then once that happens, it gets purified at one of those sites. There's lines that go out toward Cabrillo College. There's a couple of spots along the way where the water would recharge, there'd be recharge wells. So, and there's a couple extra just in case we over or underestimated the amount of recharge. And so and then there's 3 pipeline routes, the railroad, Capitola Road, and Soquel Frontage Road. So trying to keep options open and see in the EIR what kind of might work best. Yeah.
I know I'm pushing my time limit here, but if I could ask Rosemary one. Is it appropriate, can I ask, the water for Santa Cruz presentation? I thought was very good and thorough. Can you comment on that? I mean, you're already working.
Are you sure you want me to?
Well, just short. I don't think any hours. You're working toward the 300 acre feet. If I understand their plan, they just want to pump up those numbers and just bring a lot more. Can you just comment on there?
Well, there are several issues in some of the presentations about the surface water transfers that are being proposed by others that are somewhat problematic. One is the analysis that I showed you in my presentation, as I said a little bit earlier, took every drop of water every day. It uses a much longer window. It doesn't pick 2017, which was one of the wettest years, and says how much water is in the North Coast sources in 2017, which is where that 600 and, well, that's not where that comes from. It comes from sort of average, but the analysis is based on a number of things. The slide that looked at, that was in both of these presentations, that looked at the availability of water from the San Lorenzo, for example, in this last spring, March and April, doesn't show that the bypass has changed from 20 CFS to 40 CFS. So the whole, that pink part that's the part that's in that slide that's the fish flows has gotten twice as big, and part of the reason that's gotten twice as big is because we haven't really used Felton bypass for a really long time, and when we started talking to the fish agencies about what they would want in the reach between the Felton diversion and Tate Street, where we normally take water out, there were issues about fish passage in the wintertime upstream for spawning and what have you that had to be dealt with. So the bypass flow got twice as big, and that's not really taken into account here. Another thing is that if you're going to take the water, there's been a lot of talk about pipe sizes. You might have heard some of this, build a bigger pipe. Well, if you build a bigger pipe and you're trying to send the water into the ground, like for aquifer storage and recovery, or even for ASR, or in lieu, the water has to be treated to drinking water standards. So if you build a bigger pipe, then you can't just build a 30 MGD pipe, you have to build a 30 MGD treatment plant. And you have to build the capacity of 30 million gallons in a given day to put the water into the ground. So transmission to the facility, making the treatment plant bigger, putting the water in the ground. And if you're thinking about maximizing the sizing so that you can take every drop of water that's available that particular day, then you're maximizing costs too in a way that will make your eyes really get big. So what we're really looking at in our analysis is optimizing the project, recognizing that we have the variability that you've seen over 70 plus years of record, that we have to find the sweet spot in there that's cost effective and still solves our problem. So it's kind of a different approach to take to it. And I think that
there's also management of the lot that is so different.
Pardon me?
Management of the lot is
yes, and we do recognize that there are some issues that once we get additional storage in our system, we might operate the lock in quite a different way. But we haven't changed all the things about that in the way we've modeled this so far, because we're not there yet. And so it's kind of, in order to compare where you might be going with where you've been, you can't change all the parameters at once, right? So we're doing it in a little bit of a stepwise fashion. I think that there is a reasonable assumption that there is water that would be available. Whether it will ultimately be cost effective to do that, and whether we can solve all of our problem or part of the problem, whether the member agencies in the community, the Soquel and Scotts Valley and San Lorenzo Valley might want to take our water. Those are all questions that, there aren't, the automatic answer isn't yes to. And not everybody would want to take water or under the right circumstances. So there's a whole bunch of things we're working on. We do have very good cooperative relationships with the other agencies. I think there's a lot of really good work going on the river transfers. I think some parts of this could probably work, but it's not a simple question.
And I have one thing. So, and I know Santa Cruz is doing tremendous work on this, but right now it's not legal to take the San Lorenzo water and ship it to us. They can't even store it for more than 60 days and then pull it out. I think it's 60 days. So, and you think that, and I think that'll change, but it hasn't, and people have been working on it for a long time in a lot of different places. So it's not even legal. I just want to make that clear right now.
I want to clarify that, because you probably don't understand what that means when he says it's not legal. The water rights that we have for all of our San Lorenzo River rights have what are called places of use, established places of use, a map. And Soquel Creek is not in the map of the established places of use of any of our San Lorenzo rights, which we have Knoll Creek rights on the Loch Lomond Reservoir, we have Felton diversion permits, and we have Tate Street diversion rights. So that has to be fixed in order for us to really sort of maximize what we might be able to send. But again, their wintertime demand or their low demand limits what we could really get to them, because it can't take more water than we, through in lieu, for example, than they use. There's no place to put it.
Rosemary, what about North Coast though? Because there's different water, there's no water
North
rights.
Coast is a pre-14 rights, appropriative water rights. They have, they do not have places of use in the traditional way, but they are, particularly Laguna, which is the biggest of those sources, has been fairly heavily dedicated to fish flows because of the watershed is in very good shape. And it has a long run before it has a sort of a natural blockage to fish passage, and the water quality is very good, and so it's a very healthy watershed. So a big chunk of our historic North Coast flows is not available for that's anymore dedicated for fish flows.
We had a couple other questions. Dr. Jaffe.
So just to broaden the conversation, we've been focusing on the big projects, which, give you a lot of control, and there's big agencies involved. But just a question for John and maybe the private well pumpers, is there consideration of smaller recharge projects, especially in the areas where we know that the recharge is good?
We have been working with the Resource Conservation District on doing outreach to private well owners in terms of what they can do in terms of water use efficiency and also things they can do on their property to promote more infiltration. I don't think there's a lot of big water there, but I think there's, that's one of the ways to potentially offset the impact of climate change with reduced recharge. If we can capture more of those flows up in the hills and get them into the ground instead of running off, then I think we'll all benefit from that. So that is one of the things we've been working on. It hasn't been baked into a plan yet. We don't have a target for how much water that might involve, but it's certainly something we want to keep looking at.
But that could be a part of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan.
That's correct.
It's not, it's a lot of little things that can add up.
Right.
Okay.
Charlie?
So this has to do with the potable water reuse facility, wherever it winds up, if it happens, to be located somewhere. I think you mentioned there's 8 million gallons a day of effluent.
On average, yes.
On average. And you propose 25%, so 2 million.
Yeah, we have a memorandum of understanding with the city of Santa Cruz, and that would leave enough for them if they ever decide to go that route, but it's enough for us, but yes.
Okay, so we would have 2 million a day on average.
It's close to that, not quite that.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's
So
close.
Roughly like 700 million a year, which is what, 2,500 acre feet? or something?
Well, it's designed, the plan is designed for 1,500 acre feet. That's what the overdraft problem, the portion that we mean SoCal Creek Water District. However, an important component of the EIR is that the pipe is going to be much bigger to carry that water. So if it comes to being that the MGA says, hey, we need to put more water through there, the proposal is not to put a pipe just to solve our portion of the problem, but big enough to solve other portions of the problem too. We don't want to dig up that pipe twice.
Right, so the 25%, that was chosen not arbitrarily, but so to have the capacity of at least 1,500 acre feet.
And just to mention, just so far, that's the only one that is potentially drought-proof, because we're looking at insurance. Some recycling or desalination.
And that 1,500 acre feet a year compared to what, 20 or 30 from recharge?
Stormwater recharge is smaller quantities, but perhaps it's a lot of smaller locations that still could be done.
Sure.
Is there anyone else that has questions from either the advisory committee or the public? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I did have a question related to, needed clarification on the EIR. I haven't really got into weeds on it yet, but I did look at the guidelines that were provided, the summary guidelines. And I looked at the alternatives, and alternative number 2 is the closest that comes to describing the Water Supply Advisory Committee's number one recommendation, that is the interagency water exchanges. And it's listed as an alternative, but I was told, and I think by Mr. Duncan, that it wasn't an alternative, it was both. And in fact, your newsletter indicated that it wasn't, that these were not alternatives, these were all of the above, or both of those options, that they would be done in conjunction with each other. Both the Pure Water SoCal and the water exchanges, the interagency water exchanges. I'm trying to see it as listed as an alternative. So I think that probably needs to be clarified. Also in the description, it says that the city and the district would guarantee that water would be available during drought and non-drought conditions. That seems like a real high bar. It seems like a very rigid condition to place on interagency exchanges when you don't know what Mother Nature is going to do. So I did like Ms. Menard's statement about the value of adaptability, and I think there needs to be some flexibility in some agreement between the city and SoCal Creek.
So those are great comments, Jan. Thank you. And I urge you to submit them through the process, for the EIR process. But I'll respond. So when you do that, what you want to do with the EIR, if Pure Water SoCal is to produce 1,500 feet, you want comparable things that could produce the same amount. That's why you have to have the guarantee. It certainly doesn't mean if the board certified the EIR for 1,500 acre feet that we still couldn't take river water in addition to that. I mean, that's an option that's always there. But the EIR has specific guidelines when you go through that kind of analysis that you got to compare apples to apples. But we have a community guide for members of the public here, which please see me if you want one tonight. It's online. Please submit comments. Anything you say tonight, you need to submit through the appropriate process. So I just want to be clear on that. I'm not writing your comments down, so please submit them or do it at our event coming up at the end of the month. Thank you.
So any other questions? I'm right back there, and then we'll go over to
It's just a short question. Is there anything about rate of being able to recharge an area? You know, that when I dump a big bucket of water, it doesn't go into the ground so fast. You know, but is that something to think about in terms of the receptivity of where you're recharging?
Yeah. The problem in most of this region is that it's pancake layer geology. There's some sand and then there's a clay layer. And as soon as the water goes down and hits the clay layer, it goes horizontal. So it's hard to get water down in the Purisima. Down in the Romus, where Central and Rouse District and Mr. Benich, that's more, it's sandy, the Romus red sands. And so it does, and those were those recharge areas that we were looking at. But our aquifers are like 300, 400, 500 feet down below the ground.
The water supply.
The water supplies are saying.
But as Dr. Jaffe mentioned, the recharge areas for some of the Purisima are up higher in the hills, where there could be some potential there.
Right, where it outcrops in the recharge areas.
So it depends.
It depends.
Okay, that's all Santa Cruz. It depends.
And then there was another question here.
I'd like to respond to the questions of Rosemary about my talk. On the spiky graph of the hydrograph of the river with the yellow stripe across it, where Rosemary said that the fish flows have been increased from 20 CFS to 40. That's 1% of the top that spikes on the graph. That's a semi-log graph, and it affects the take of the 30 MGD not at all. I mean, imperceptibly, because of the shape of the spikes. Secondly, when she said earlier that water transfers didn't look like they would satisfy Santa Cruz's demand, she was not quoting aquifer specs. She was quoting of the 10 fire hoses, several of them were still crippled in her model. And I think we owe it to ourselves to have a model or a computation run, a convergence run done with the actual aquifer spec. Even Wasac hasn't done that yet, and it's a really crying shame. There's a lot of water there, and it really does work.
I'll let you work that out with the city of Santa Cruz, since that would be, any water would have to come through them. So, are there any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Becky Steinbrenner. I first of all want to say that I scheduled 2 study sessions for the public to look over the Soquel Creek Water District's Pure Water Soquel draft EIR. And there's a flyer out on the table. They'll both be at the Aptos Library. The first one is next Wednesday, and the second one will be August 8th, 6 to 8 p.m. There's a flyer on the back table. And the purpose is just to help people. It's a thick document, and it's daunting, and a lot of people have no idea where to begin or what to do. So it's to assist people who would like to join in but are not quite sure how.
And there is a 20-page community handbook available for people.
Yes, I've seen that. The document itself is enlightening, though. I have a question for Mr. Ricker. In the recent modeling, was it included to model the effects of shutting off the wells of Soquel Creek Water District?
I think you're referring to the modeling that we are going to be doing with regards to looking at impacts on stream flow. And I don't think we're modeling shutting off all the wells, but we're looking at shutting off the wells that may be close to Soquel Creek and to see how that affects the stream flow.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for either Ms. Menard or Mr. Duncan. I saw in the piece about the pilot study for the water transfers that Laguna Creek in the North Coast is not included. Can anybody explain to me why Laguna Creek is being excluded in the pilot study?
I know what you're saying. All right. So there's been a question about where the 300 acre feet came from, the 100 million gallons. And I think in some other meeting I made this comment. The 100 million gallons for the pilot was based on the average flow of Lydell, not Laguna, because Laguna has been, as I said earlier, often dedicated completely, even in the wintertime, to fish flows under certain conditions. So the idea was, in order for us to sort of meet the standard of being assured that we didn't provide water from other sources than the North Coast, we just took that one piece and we said, let's use the small amount, let's start here, let's do this test, and if it is a successful test, we can figure it out, including dealing with the water rights place of use issue that Ron mentioned and that we are, in fact, moving forward to address. So it's not that, like, Laguna was taken out because of the fish flow dedication and my need to be able to tell the state board that I had not given Soquel any more water than was produced by a source which has a very standard 1 million gallons a day flow.
Protect the fish is the short answer.
Well, it's not protect the fish, it was an accounting thing, but it was also for the fish.
Okay. So, I thank you. 3 minutes, probably about up.
Can I ask 2 more questions?
Okay.
This is for Soquel Creek Water District. Are you going to allow your ratepayers and the private well owners who will be affected possibly by the impacts of these injection wells and possible contamination if things were to go awry, are you going to allow them a chance to vote at any point before you begin this project as to whether they would accept that risk? And also, your ratepayers will be accepting a huge financial burden. Will you allow a vote?
You know, that's a board decision, but I think with the community outreach we did and all the input, that was a vote of confidence. And also the survey where it indicated, I think it was 77% supported it. That's a good indication. Thank you.
So you're not going to allow a copy vote?
That's a board decision at a later date. It's not part of the EIR process.
I see. Thank you. Mike,
Last question.
last question is how will you verify the 2-month state-required holding times for the water that is injected, if it is injected?
If it's recharged into the aquifer, first you do modeling, and then you go out and you put monitoring wells in. The state actually verifies. Usually the common ingredient unit is, I think, bromine, I think is what's used. And you actually put it in the recharge water. It's perfectly fine for humans and fish. I've used it out even in the ocean. And you actually put it in there and you measure down there to empirically verify the modeling estimates. So that's how you do it.
You'll be using bromine?
Not bromine. It's whatever the state asks us to use. I was giving an example of where it's been chemicals that have been used other places or ingredients. But it's a completely safe, that's mandated by the state board to put in the well. Then you let it flow, and you have monitoring wells, physical monitoring wells, where you take samples out at designated times to see the travel time. So it's verified, the modeling estimates are verified empirically through measuring the flow and travel times.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have, our next meeting is here on September 20th, I think 7 p.m. There is also a GSB Advisory Committee meeting also going to be here on August 27th. Okay. So until the next board meeting, thank you all very much. Good night.
For the GSP Advisory Committee members, Melanie has a document for you. It's the community handbook. And for any community members who would like one,